Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marianne Vega Clancy, President of the League of Women Voters of North County, San Diego, along with my colleague, Wendy Young, Events Chair of the LWV of San Diego. I would like to welcome you this evening, presented by the two leagues of San Diego County. Would you like to say anything?
Hello and welcome.
Before we begin today, it's important to remember the enduring role of the League of Women Voters in our democracy. The League is a nonpartisan grassroots organization that has been working since 1920 to empower voters and defend democracy. We never support or oppose a candidate or political party, but we do hold elected officials accountable, and we encourage transparency and responsiveness across all levels of government. And we do work and advocate on issues of concern to our members and to the public. Today's presentation is an example of this work. To learn more about upcoming meetings and events, please go to our respective websites, lwvsandiego.org and lwvncsd.org. Now, let's get started. I am honored to welcome you on behalf of the Federal Funding Task Force, a joint effort of the Leagues of Women Voters of San Diego and North County, San Diego. Our team has been studying how federal dollars flow into our county and how they shape daily life, from housing to roads, education, and healthcare. With budget decisions unfolding in Washington, we'll share what has been the norm for federal funds in the San Diego area and what the proposed changes mean or could mean locally, and spark conversation about how federal funding touches each of us, often in ways that we don't even realize. Susan and Rachel, our presenters today, represent an entire team of members from both leagues who have done a tremendous amount of research, gathering data on the many federal agencies that provide funding to the San Diego area and how it's spent, including programs critical to the community. Both Susan and Rachel joined the league less than a year ago, and their contributions are already making an enormous impact. So thank you, Susan, Rachel, and the entire team. Now I'll hand things off to you. Susan?
Great, thank you. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Before we get started in the meat of the discussion, I want to share a few business items that some have already been said. Again, today's webinar is being recorded and links will be available on the webpage, as well as a PDF version of the slides. And we'll be producing a report and an appendix of our resources that will also be made available. So don't worry about reading the details. We invite you to relax and listen. Also, there will be a Q&A at the end. Okay, so let's get started. So to better understand what federal funding changes might mean to San Diego, several members of the league joined together to research what federal funding comes to the San Diego area and how those funds currently support our communities and citizens. Next slide. This webinar is intended to share the information that we found to help you evaluate how the 2025 and the just adopted moments ago 2026 federal budget could change and affect our community. So let's look at federal funding. Next slide, please. As you know, the federal government annually receives money from several sources on the left. These include income tax, which is about 50% of total revenue, payroll and corporate taxes, fees for use of land or property, and tariffs. On the right, federal spending is divided into three categories. Discretionary spending is the spending determined by the federal budget process, what just was passed by Congress tonight. Mandatory spending is for programs and services that are required by law, including Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And lastly, the major spending can also include interest on the national debt. Next slide. According to the U.S. Treasury, in 2024, the federal government took in $4.9 trillion, but spent $6.75 trillion. This was a $1.8 trillion difference. And as of October 1st, 2025, just 6 weeks ago, the US national debt was $37.8 trillion. In early 2025, the new administration began discussing and proposing changes to these sources and expenditures, including tariffs, which bring in revenues, tax cuts, which reduce revenue, changes to the federal budget, the discretionary spending, for both the in-process 2025 fiscal year and the president's proposed budget for the 2026 fiscal year. These changes include consequential increases and decreases in funding levels for the various federal departments and agencies. We recognize that the San Diego area receives significant federal funding, and changes would likely affect our community, so we wanted to see how. Let's look at how federal funds come into the San Diego area. Next slide. Okay, we're going to spend a minute on this one. Funds come in 3 different ways. On the left is direct fund payment. Federal funds come to our area in 3 different ways. Through direct payments on the left, which include wages, contracts, grants, and funds to businesses from the federal government, payments to individuals such as Social Security payments. And in the middle, the federal funds come into our area by payments to the state. So many federal agencies provide funding to the states to address mutual federal-state priorities. And the state uses the funds for contracts or grants or payments to individuals. We refer to these funds as pass-through funds. They pass through the state to the local areas. Additionally, there's payments to local governments. So federal agencies can provide funds to cities, counties, tribes, or special districts. So looking at an example, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, provides funding all 3 ways to implement its mission. The San Diego area receives funding directly. The federal government pays insurance companies and businesses. It receives funding via pass-through funds, money going to the state, and then the state Office of Emergency Services using it around the state. And funding also goes to local governments, for example, to the county or to the San Diego Unified Port District. To get data on federal spending, next slide, we use something called usaspending.gov. It's in tiny print down in the bottom left corner. It is the official online source for US federal government spending data. It provides information on how federal money is spent. And we were able to get data on funding coming to the San Diego area for the green shaded boxes, direct payments, including grants and contracts, and payments to local governments. And that data told us that in federal fiscal year 24, the federal government provided California over $480 billion, and San Diego got 38 billion of that, about 8%, either directly or through local funds, local governments. We were not able to use USA spending to get funds coming to San Diego for the white boxes. So USA spending does not break out wages by area. So the San Diego metropolitan area had the 6th largest concentration of federal workers nationwide. And so wages to federal workers could be quite significant for our area. We also could not use usaspending.gov to see how the pass-through funds work, how much money the state of California got from the federal government and then passed through to San Diego. Again, these are very significant amounts, and where we have this information from other sources, we will provide it. So let's shift to look at how federal funding is changing and how we sought to understand those changes. Next slide. As we said at the opening, in early 2025, the administration began discussing ways to reduce the federal discretionary spending for 2025, already half over. And in May, the president recommended changes to discretionary funding levels for the federal fiscal year 26. It's normal for the president to make a proposed budget that Congress then considers. And that information was sent to the chair of the Appropriations Committee from the Office of Management and Budget. And this image, the table, is taken from that letter, and it provides a glimpse of the enormous changes to discretionary funding recommended for 2026. Significant increases were recommended for some departments. So if you look at the far right-hand column, you can see the percent plus or negative. Increases, being positive numbers in the right-hand column, were for Department of Defense, parts of the Department of Energy, and parts of the Department of Homeland Security. And again, this is just a clipping from that. It's not the complete list. And significant decreases were recommended for other departments, negative percentages on the right. These include the Department of Agriculture, Education, Health and Human Services, and others. To understand the impacts of these proposed changes on the San Diego area, we realized that, next slide, we needed to answer 3 questions. What have we been receiving? What's our baseline? How are those funds used? And what are the likely impacts of the proposed changes? Next slide. We focused on federal funding coming to San Diego in federal fiscal year 24. When we started, that was the most recent year for which a full year of data was available. Federal fiscal year 24 began October 1st and ended September 30th, 2024. Sorry, it started October 1st, 2023 and ended September 30th, 2024. So the third question we couldn't really address because, next slide, there is ongoing litigation from numerous lawsuits related to the 2025 budget, the budget period that ended September 30th, about 6 weeks ago. And even though the federal fiscal year 2026 budget started October 1st, about 6 weeks ago, Congress just tonight passed the federal budget that would implement that spending plan for this fiscal year. So we cannot assess actual funding changes and what they'll mean to the community and residents of our area. Next slide. But changes are already taking place. And with the numerous executive actions going on and the additional government shutdown, these have revealed enormous uncertainties regarding funding to various departments and agencies. So let's dive in. As said in the beginning, over 38 billion of federal funds came to the San Diego area as direct payments and payments to local governments. The most direct funding to the San Diego area was provided by the 11 federal departments shown on this pie chart. Each of these provided over 175 million. So even the littlest slice was over 175 million. So for the rest of this presentation, we're going to look briefly at each of these 11 agencies, how much funding they brought to our area, and how those funds contribute to our community and our residents. However, we want to acknowledge that there is also significant funding coming to our area from wages and from pass-through funds to the state of California. We will flag these in the following sections. So let's start looking at agencies, and we'll begin with the Department of Defense. Rachel?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. So before we dig in, just a context note, the administration now refers to the Department of Defense as the Department of War. And because the data we're looking at was collected on the Department of Defense moniker, we refer to it as the Department of Defense or the DoD for this presentation. In federal fiscal year 2024, the DoD spending contributed to 16 billion in direct funding and another 15 billion in wages in the area. This represented over 41% of all federal funds sent directly to the San Diego area and 23% of the total economy of San Diego. So how were the 16 billion in DoD funds used? We have 21 DoD departments or offices that spent funds in the San Diego area in the fiscal year of 2024. Of those 21 agencies, 12 spent over 10 million in the San Diego area. They are shown here on this pie chart, those 12. The Navy, which includes the Marine Corps, the Air Force, and the Army account for over 85% of DoD funds coming directly into the San Diego area. That's over $14 billion in total. Spending by DoD contributed billions to industry and businesses in the area. The DoD contracted with over 2,600 businesses, funded research, and contributed to school districts in military-connected communities. This DoD spending provides income to many active military and civilian workers, all spending in our communities. The military presence is significant. As most of us know, the San Diego County is a major hub for active duty service members, for civilian defense workers, and reservists. So it should be noted that because of the military activity, we have over 240,000 veterans in the area, and we'll get more into the VA funds later here in the presentation. So overall, DoD spending has enormous influence in the area and our economy and our communities. The military presence supported in one way or another 24% of San Diego area's 2024 labor force. That's almost 1 in 4 jobs in the area. So now we're going to move on to the Social Security Administration. Sue.
Okay, so next slide, please. So in general, the Social Security Administration provides benefits when citizens work at a job that pays into the Social Security Fund and then become eligible with a life qualifying event for them or a family member that puts them into one of the 5 categories in the blue-gray dots at the bottom. Social Security then provides monthly benefits to those qualified persons, such as persons with disabilities, older adults who have little or no income or resources, as well as the older portion of our population. Next slide. In 2024, over $12.3 billion came from Social Security into the San Diego economy, going directly to individuals. Social Security payments are one of the largest sources of federal funds to the San Diego area, and while there is a small amount of discretionary funding to administer the fund, almost all of Social Security is non-discretionary spending addressed by the annual federal budget, but it is mandatory spending required by law and coming from a separate fund that's financed through payroll taxes paid by employees and employers. The Social Security Fund has been mentioned in recommendations for changes to federal spending and to help address the national debt, so we include it here. How does this money benefit our community? Next slide, please. 16% of San Diego area population received Social Security benefits in 2024. This is slightly below the national average of 18.6%. Social Security funds are then used in our community and contribute significantly to our local economy. Okay, moving to the next agency. Rachel?
Great. So broadly in San Diego, Department of Human Health and Services funds contribute to Medi-Cal research and ensuring healthcare access to the county. As we cover the agency background, note that the president has recommended a 26.2% reduction in the HHS federal fiscal year of 2026 budget. The Department of Health and Human Services is made up of 16 agencies. These agencies cover a broad spectrum of areas. On this list, you'll see the CDC, the FDA, and the Administration on Aging. Today, we're going to take a closer look at the first 2, the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, or CMMS. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, highlighted here in magenta, provide health coverage for more than 100 million Americans nationwide. This coverage comes through programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Children's Health Insurance Program, also known as CHIP, and the Health Insurance Marketplace. These are mandatory spending programs funded by dedicated trust funds and are not part of the annual federal budget appropriations. However, taken together, they are among the largest sources of funds to the San Diego area and are often mentioned as sources of spending cuts. So we included them here in this analysis. Let's look more closely at Health and Human Services and particularly the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid funds. Most of the CMMS funds are different in three ways. They predominantly are pass-through funds opposed to direct funding. They are mandatory spending, including Medicare and Medicaid, and they represent enormous funding levels similar to the DoD and the SSA. Over 80% of the money from federal government to California was for HHS programs. The $12.8 billion that San Diego received for Medi-Cal in 2024 was pass-through funds from the state, originating as Medicaid funds, excuse me. The Medicaid is Medi-Cal in California. California's Medicaid program is called Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal and CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, have the largest share of federal funding for HHS programs. While direct funding is a much smaller amount than the pass-through funds for social services we were just looking at, the HHS 16 sub-agencies still brought $2.3 billion in federal funding directly into the San Diego area. This is not including wages or pass-through funds. The two HHS sub-agencies providing the most direct funds in the San Diego area were the National Institute of Health and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. 90% of CMMS, which is $541 million, supports the implementation of Medicare, Medi-Cal, and CHIP programs in the area. Let's look at these two sub-agencies, starting with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Because Medicare and Medicaid are so significant to providing care and are some of the largest sources of federal funds to the San Diego area, we're going to take a deeper look. On this chart, we see Medicare and Medicaid side by side. Medicare is a federal health insurance program supporting Americans aged 65 and older and some younger Americans with disabilities. Over 788,000 people in San Diego are supported by Medicare. Medicaid is a federal state health insurance program servicing low-income adults, children, pregnant women, older adults, and people with disabilities. Over 1 million San Diegans, that's 32% of the population, are supported by Medicaid. Medicaid is joint funded by the federal government and the state. Let's take a closer look at Medicaid. San Diegans eligible for Medi-Cal include low-income adults, children in low-income families, and pregnant women. People with disabilities, those include disabilities that prevent people from working, including challenges like hearing loss, Parkinson's disease, ALS, stroke, and autism, and the list goes on and on. Note, children represent 33% of those on Medi-Cal in San Diego County. Generally, Medi-Cal services include doctor visits, hospitalizations, emergency services, prescription drugs, maternity, and newborn care. It's generally thought that these kinds of services help prevent individuals and families from going bankrupt because of medical bills. And research shows that Medi-Cal funded preventative care results in cost savings. Routine checkups, screenings, and other preventative services help catch health issues before they become serious and more expensive to treat. Preventative care can reduce hospital visits and the need for complex treatments and long-term care. For example, managing high blood pressure with medication and regular doctor visits is less costly than treating a stroke or heart failure. Investing in prevention keeps people healthier while reducing affordable healthcare spending. So that's part of the reason why Medicaid is so important. If we just take a look at the headlines here in San Diego, they are significant. As you can see, a large number of San Diego County residents rely on Medi-Cal and CHIP programs. We could probably have 6 of these slides in this presentation. Statewide, nearly 2/3 of Medi-Cal funding comes from the federal government funds through HHS. On this slide, you can see fund source projections made in 2024 for the 2025-2026 fiscal year. These projections did not take into account the impacts of the current federal shutdown, the proposed federal fiscal year 2026 budget changes. Any reduction in funds from the federal government would either need to be covered by additional state funds or an adjustment in services. Many believe that the federal budget cut will result in a reduction of services. San Diego County staff have analyzed the proposed budget cuts and have raised their concerns about the impacts, which range from higher mortality rates to more frequent emergency visits, increased family medical debt, increased uninsured San Diegans, increases of uncompensated care costs for hospitals, to job loss impacting the local economy. So we must ask, can California make up the reduction in federal funds, or will we see a reduction in services? We're going to shift now to the National Institute of Health, another HHS agency, as you saw earlier in the stack. Nationally, NIH has significantly supported healthcare breakthroughs, local treatment for better healthcare outcomes, and the local economy. One study found that NIH funding is behind roughly 99% of medications that were approved between 2010 and 2019 in the entire US. San Diego area research have contributed a lot to the development of medications with drugs like Humira for autoimmune disease and Aimovig for migraines were all developed here in San Diego. A discovery made by the Salk Institute scientists has led to over 300 approved drugs for cancer. So we're very active in this industry, as many of you know. Now let's take a significant look at the contributors who are local in the NIH. In 2024, NIH invested $1.25 billion in the San Diego area researchers. This is with the University of California, San Diego, which is by far the largest participant. You can see all the agencies here on the chart. UC San Diego was also the largest employer, headquartered in San Diego County with over 41,000 employees. Altogether, these entities employed more than 63,000 people and educate more than 84,000 students locally. And so you may be wondering, what do these researchers do? There are many institutes within the NIH. This graph shows the institutes that provided more than 10 million in funding to the San Diego area researchers and the amount paid. This was in 2024. The National Institutes on Allergies and Infectious Diseases, Aging, and Cancer provided the most funding to the San Diego area. You'll see those are the top three here on this chart. And as a reminder, the president has proposed reducing the Department of Health and Human Services budget by 26.2%. If applied evenly, that would be just 133 million in reductions to the top two institutes on this list here alone. So with that, we're going to move on to the next agency, Sue.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So we're going to talk about the Department of Veteran Affairs, and I just want to acknowledge our veterans and note that yesterday was Veterans Day to honor all of those who served in our military. Next slide. So there are 240,000 veterans in the San Diego area, and they represent 6% of our area population. Sadly, they also represent 16% of the housing insecure. All vets are eligible for VA services or benefits, and it's estimated that over half of the vets in our area are receiving benefits. So how do federal funds from the VA support our veterans? VA funding over $3 billion in 2024 largely supports programs for veterans and their families. The largest program at the top of this table accounted for 75% of the VA funding coming into the area for veterans compensation for service-connected disability program. In addition to these programs down at the bottom, the VA contracts with many local businesses for building and maintaining VA facilities, including the hospitals and facility operations and support services, everything from landscaping to dining services. That spending came to over 325 million in fiscal year 24, and it was over 10% of the total VA funds that came to San Diego area. We do not have data for wages and salaries in 2024. However, in 2022, the VA reportedly spent nearly 955 million on operating expenses for the Jennifer Moreno VA Medical Center San Diego and outpatient clinics. This total, 3 times the number on the bottom of this slide, includes wages and salaries and may provide a better estimate of the total annual VA spending in the San Diego area. Next slide. So overall, VA funding in the San Diego area provides essential services to our vets, and it also supports our local businesses and puts money into our economy. Okay, let's move on to the next agency. Department of Transportation. Next slide. So the Department of Transportation has 7 sub-agencies that provide funding to the San Diego area in 2024. and these support our planes, trains, and automobiles and our maritime. The Federal Highway Administration funding accounted for over 90% of Department of Transportation funding to our area, and the Federal Aviation Administration was the second largest at 8%. Next slide. So what did the Federal Highway Administration do? They provided funds to several local governments to do surface transportation block grant programs and provide funding for congestion mitigation and air quality improvement, national highway performance, carbon reductions, and transportation alternatives. The Federal Aviation Administration provided ongoing funds to the San Diego Airport expansion and funds to our other regional airports. So the DOT provides critical funding to support our regional transportation systems, and the President's recommendations for changes to discretionary funding for 2026 included a net increase of 5% to DOT. However, DOT funding associated with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that was proposed for 11% reductions. So we do not know how DOT funding to the San Diego area might be impacted. So shifting to our next agency, Rachel.
Great, thanks, Sue. HUD. Here are the main areas that HUD covers in the San Diego area. As you can see, it is a major contributor to housing assistance for people in the region. We're currently in a housing crisis, and there are three core parts to this crisis. You have the unit shortage, the affordability issues, and homelessness. Some additional context around affordability challenges. A home buyer would need a household income of $247,000 a year to purchase a median priced home and not have the house payment be more than 30% of their income. Note that the minimum wage in San Diego, effective for January 2026, annualizes to a salary just under $37,000 for a full-time 40-hour week employee. So that's a little bit more on the why we have affordability challenge in the middle here. In the San Diego area, we have over 80,000 people in subsidized housing. And we're going to look at how HUD's direct funds come into the county. There's two programs providing the most funding in the area. One is the Section 8 housing choice vouchers and project-based rental assistance. Now we're going to look at how these support San Diego. Individuals receive support from HUD in two ways, through the Section 8 housing voucher and rental assistance loans. And then HUD also offers federal loans and programs to support construction for new housing. So what are the proposed changes for HUD funding? The President's recommendations for changes to discretionary funding levels for the federal fiscal year of 2026 include a decrease of 43% from the 2025 federal levels. While we do not know how this will be implemented, it is likely to have a significant impact on programs in the San Diego area and potentially put at risk the housing for thousands of San Diego residents. And with that, we're going to move on from HUD and housing to the next department. Sue?
Okay, Department of Homeland Security. So 10 Homeland Security sub-agencies fund work in the San Diego area. Many of us are not aware that Homeland Security includes the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, at the airport, and FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, along with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Protection, and others. Next slide. In 2024, there were 5 agencies that each expended over $30 million in the San Diego area. Those are shown colored in the text on the right. Nearly 75% of the $619 million in Homeland Security funds to San Diego went to TSA and FEMA. So let's look at those. For TSA, 44% of the total funding was for TSA, and 98% of that was for aviation screening, equipment, operation, and maintenance. Next slide. FEMA provided over $240 million. That's 39% of DHS funding to the area. Also shown in green, 18% was for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, But let's go back to FEMA. What do the FEMA funds do? Next slide. You may recall that in January of 2024, we had a severe storm that caused flooding in San Diego. It was referred to as the 2024 San Diego Severe Storm and Flooding Event. It was a declared major disaster area by the federal government. 94% of the FEMA funds in 2024 was used to help prepare for and address extreme events, including the disaster relief funds for that event, including flood insurance payments, shelter and services, and public assistance. Wrapping up this section, we have seen that the Department of Homeland Security sub-agencies provide a variety of services to our area. The president's recommended changes for the 2026 budget included a 69% increase, and that was significantly going to be for sub-agencies such as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but it also included a 30% decrease for FEMA funds to address disaster relief and wildfire suppression. Okay, now transitioning to our next agency, Rachel.
Department of Education. The Department of Education funding supports San Diego's early development and students from preschool through college, especially those from low-income and underserved communities. These funds broadly provide instruction, special education, and financial aid. So who goes to school in the San Diego area? As you can see here, 53% of our 465,000 K through 12 students we have in the county are socioeconomically disadvantaged. 1 in 6 students are English learners, and almost 15.9% of San Diego's county students have a disability that receives support from federal funds. Disability categories for our students range from deaf and blind kids to traumatic brain injury to autism, and then specific learning disabilities and more. And then we have on the right financial aid for students after high school. Let's look at these federal funds. Then the first line here, 416 million is for post-secondary education grants. This goes to help qualifying students receive an education after high school. These include the federal Pell Grant, the federal Work Study, education opportunity grants, and teacher assistant grants. This is almost 2/3 of the direct federal funding coming into the county from the Department of Education. We look at the remaining direct funding here is 263 million, which supports a breadth of programs, including K through 12 students. We have over 465,000 K through 12 students in the county. If all of the 263 million was allocated to these students, it would be about $550 in direct federal funds per K through 12 student. Although in part hypothetical, this per student math might be relevant to those of you interested in the president's push for school voucher programs and its impact on the local public education budgets and the community. The president's proposal for 2026 fiscal year has a 15% reduction in the Department of Education budget. That was a 15, sorry for my misspoke. If the reduction was allocated evenly, that would cut just over $100 million in funds to the San Diego area. As the status and implementation of the budget progresses, the context we have here is that the federal funds locally have been supporting post-high school students with financial aid, and our over 465,000 K through 12 students with teacher education, and the socioeconomically disadvantaged students, English learners, and students with disabilities. And now we're going to move on to the National Science Foundation. Sue.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So the NSF, National Science Foundation, provided funding to San Diego researchers working in 11 areas of research. More than half of this funding was for geosciences, the blue big pie piece, and it includes ocean sciences and other geosciences. The second largest one was computer and information science and engineering. So NSF funding to the San Diego area largely went to the University of California, San Diego, followed distantly by the San Diego State University Foundation. NSF funding provides critical investment to programs of research and helps to grow our future scientists and knowledge and application of earth sciences, tech, and data. Numerous NSF grants had funding rescinded earlier this year, and there's much ongoing litigation. Some have been restored. However, the president's recommended changes for the 2026 budget called for a 55% decrease in NSF funding. With such decreases in NSF funding, our San Diego research institutes will be significantly impacted. Individual researchers may have to move their research and students, the next generation, out of the country, and supporting businesses that provide supplies and services to these programs would also be impacted. Okay, moving on to the next agency, Department of Energy. So in 2024, 66% of DOE funds that came to the San Diego area went to General Atomics, and 10% went to the University of California, San Diego. What is DOE doing with all this money? DOE funds research in both current and potential future energy technologies. General Atomics, that received so much funding, they were funded to conduct research and development on a nuclear fusion energy process. DOE funds support San Diego in being a national leader in energy research and innovation. Proposed 2026 discretionary budget changes included some increases and some decreases. Increases to the National Nuclear Security Administration funding, 25%, would support developing nuclear reactors and researching advanced nuclear fuels. And other DOE funding lines would be reduced by over 18%, cutting non-essential research on nuclear energy and cutting carbon dioxide removal and other technologies. It's not clear how these proposed changes would affect jobs and infrastructure currently supported by DOE funding. Okay, transitioning to the last agency we're going to discuss. Rachel?
Yes, the Department of Agriculture. The USDA's primary San Diego line items in the 2024 federal fiscal year were just supporting programs that get fresh foods to local residents. Part of these programs supported the local economy by working with local farmers. The USDA also supported agriculture and forest management, also known as fire suppression work, in our area. The 172 million that the USDA agencies injected into the San Diego area is approximately 1% of all federal funds in the region in 2024, excluding pass-through funds and wages. A quick call out to the fourth agency on this chart is the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, sending 4.87 million to the area, which among many things tests for aviation influenza, and San Diego County ranks number 10 in the state for egg-laying hens. So it's important work. We also have more small farms than any other county in the state and are the second largest nursery county in the country. So who is supported locally by the USDA funds? USDA funds, the Food and Nutrition Service provides 400,000 residents with food security. That's 12%, more than 1 in 10 people in the San Diego area. To help build perspective, this 400,000 number is $283 per year per person in the San Diego area. And it's in direct funds from the Food and Nutrition Service. So let's take a closer look at who else receives direct funds. Of those 400,000 people, we have 130,000 children and 100,000 seniors. Looking at the Forest Service, the President's proposed budget for the 2026 includes consolidating and unifying the federal wildlife fire responsibilities into a single new federal wildland fire service at the Department of the Interior, including transferring agriculture's current wildfire and management resources and responsibilities. And with over 5,000 farms, you can see that how significant agriculture is in the county. This 1.8 billion in annual revenue commodities looks to be supported by about 14 million in services from the different USDA agencies. And there is interconnectivity within with budget impacts, as we have 35 local farms with meaningful contracts at risk if they are cut to the food and nutrition program. So overall, the president's recommendations for the proposed 2026 federal fiscal year discretionary budget changes are 18% in reductions to the USDA budget. And here on the slide, you can see some of the hypotheses about how that will impact San Diego. Okay, in closing, today our objective has been to identify what federal funds have been coming into our community, and two, to start to understand how these funds currently service our local community in the San Diego area. We did this by looking at as many resources as we could for the federal fiscal year of 2024. And our ultimate objective is number 3 here, to enable you to evaluate and understand budget changes and the potential pros and cons of those changes. So let's look at point 3 further. We cannot speak to what the changes will ultimately be, but we can do a couple of things. We can look at what the proposed top-level changes with a better understanding of how the federal funds enter the community. I'm just going to note here that these are the changes that were recommended, Sue help me, as by the president in 20 back in 2025 for the 2026 budget, and they don't take into account anything that's happened today in those recommendations. So these are the same numbers you saw proposed in the May 2025 Office Management and Budget Letter. Okay, as you can see, the Department of Defense receives by far the most funding and is getting an increase, with the total 2026 discretionary ask for the Department of Defense coming in at $961.6 billion. Other departments are harder to see, so we're going to zoom in more closely and look at them at the 200 billion scale, which right now we're at the trillion scale. So here you can see that there were significant increases and decreases proposed. Let's also note we are not talking about the spending changes that occurred during the shutdown. We're talking about the budget changes for the 2026 fiscal year that were proposed by the president. Okay, so we're going to zoom back out here to our trillion scale. And we are just looking at the departments of the ones that we looked at today, the top 11 in the county that have increases. We have the Department of Defense, or Department of War, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the Department of Transportation. Although we can see that the president has proposed increases, we don't know how these increases would be applied across sub-agencies or across our county. For example, Homeland Security is proposed for a net increase, but within Homeland Security, there are increases currently proposed for immigration and customs enforcement, but yet significant decreases proposed for FEMA, as Sue was talking about earlier. Here we're looking at the decreases to the departments, of the ones that we looked at today, the 11 biggest ones in San Diego County. We have the Department of Health and Human Services, which is Medicare and Medi-Cal, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, and the Department of Agriculture. Additionally, there are rumblings that the mandatory portion of the funding for the Social Security Administration and the Medicare and Medicaid could have reductions. Okay. In summary, we've provided a baseline of the federal funds that have been coming into the area and how those funds have supported our communities and our citizens. We presented the proposed changes for the federal fiscal year of 2026, just in the few previous slides. And my note here says the budget approval is imminent, but we know it had to happen moments before we got on this call. I do not know what all the negotiations were today. And Congress is working on getting how the federal budget will be applied for this 2026 budget. We hope this presentation gives you the basis to evaluate actual changes for the budget and better understand how the federal funds come into our area. We're going to leave you with this quote or the observation by University of San Diego economist Alan Ginn, which is kind of eye-opening as we did this research. I just want to thank everyone for coming today and for their time, and a big shout out to all the volunteers on the call that contributed copious amounts of time to the research that made this presentation possible. Sue and I are just the mouthpieces. And you're welcome to download this presentation or any part of it. There are links to the webinar recording, as well as a PDF version of the slides, and a report and appendix of resources will also be made available on both leagues' websites. That's lwvncsd.org and lwvsd.org. And now we're going to open it up for Q&A. So if you haven't already typed in a question, you can do so at the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to hand it over. Let's have a look to see what we have.
Okay, so we haven't got too many questions yet. I just have two. If you have a question, type it into the Q&A box, please. Rachel, the first question we have is, do you know anything about the products or services the federal government purchases from General Atomics?
Sue, I see you nodding, Sue. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I shared during the presentation that according to usaspending.gov, the General Atomics funding, the very significant amount of funding, was for the nuclear fusion fuel research. You can go into USA Spending and you can actually see what each contract is for and the payments, the incremental yearly payments. So that particular one was for that nuclear fusion, and I see Anne on. Anne, do you want to add to that?
I do. In addition, a great deal of money is being spent on what's called I believe it's called non-human piloting, navigation. These are weapon drones and ships that are small ships that are actually have no people on them, but are controlled by computer. They also are spending a great deal of money on doing research on improving all kinds of military vehicles, airplanes, tanks, that kind of thing.
I hope that answers a little bit. And like Sue said, there is a lot of documentation.
Yes, I think we will all want to take a look at this presentation later and just really look at it closely. There's a lot of information here.
Yeah.
The next question we have is, when does Congress start working on the 2026-27 budget?
Can I take a stab, Rachel?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my understanding is that typically at the May period before the president issues the recommended budget, and he provides that to Congress, and then Congress normally in the past has negotiated and decided what they want to do, which may or may not be what the president recommended, and they negotiate until they can agree, and that is when a federal budget is adopted. That's what happened tonight. Enough of them agreed to adopt a federal budget. And sometimes that budget will provide money to an agency, but then there is a process with the Office of Management and Budget and the agency to go back and forth on how that money is going to be spent by the agency in question. So it begins quite a bit before the fiscal year starts. And it's been a long time since we had a federal budget approved before the start of the federal fiscal year on October 1st. So tonight's approval might set a recent earliness record.
We have another question. And this question, Rachel, if you would punt it to the appropriate person. Any idea of the unemployment insurance costs that the state will face due to all of the layoffs when grants, jobs, and funding goes away?
That is a phenomenal question. I don't think we have a way to see that. In part because we can't tell how the funds are going to be applied individually to the budget, so we can't tell how employees will be impacted. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of unknowns about how the funds will be applied. Therefore, we don't know if it'll impact jobs or services and goods or just yeah. So I think that's impossible to answer or even ballpark at this moment with how little is known about the application of the budget. Sue, is that fair?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a great question. And I would imagine with the amount of changes, it could be significant.
The next question is, how will a family of 4 renting a home, 2 kids in elementary school, adults employed at a school and a hospital be affected?
That is a great question, and there are many layers to that. I think there's probably like several different team members that would each have a sentence to answer that question. Anyone feel free to chime in, but I think there are cuts potentially to both those agencies mentioned. So there may or may not be job impacts. Would be my first note. Sue, do you have a second note to pile onto that? I see you nodding your head.
No, I'm just thinking the kids could be affected by the Department of Education cuts. As you said, the employment of the parents could be affected by various changes. And none of us know what's going to happen to the interest rates for the home if you don't have a fixed interest rate. There's a lot of pieces here that could affect it, especially if you start looking at potential illnesses to the family or something like that.
Yeah, access to medical care has been flagged. It's a great question. I mean, the scenarios are.
It's so messy. Another question. Did the vote tonight approve all the cuts and increases you discussed?
We don't know exactly the answer to that. I am aware that some of SNAP and WIC was negotiated in this step. So I don't know if that actually changed the cuts to the whole agency or if it just reallocated cuts to protect some of those programs. I saw that today. I don't think we can actually answer all the percentages. It seems like there were only a few items that were negotiated though. So
I would say in large part, we were hoping that we could give that job to the participants tonight with the background we've provided, because the federal budget is huge. It's hundreds of pages long, and knowing exactly what was approved or not approved in tonight's vote will take weeks for people to read through and find out.
I'd like to add something. As we have done this project, it has become clearer and clearer that one of the areas where we can use this study, it's not really a league study, it's more of a project. But one of the ways that we can use this is to help communities educate themselves on how the government, the federal government, affects them, and use that to evaluate candidates for congressional office. I think there's a real opportunity using this type of information on what the government does, because the funding is, or at least was, in the hands of Congress in the old days, and then the president would approve or disapprove, and they dicker around and decide what to do. But it seems to me that League could use this as a voter service tool in a way and help voters evaluate candidates' readiness to be a congressional candidate. I mean, I think it takes a great deal of knowledge in order to understand the budget, much less decide how what kind of money you're going to request for your particular district. So that's my 2 bits about what I think we should be doing in the future with this information.
It is a lot of information. We do have another question that came in, and that question is, I noticed that Data Elevate LLC was one of the top receivers from the person thought it was NSF. So that's National Science whatever it is.
Foundation.
Yeah, they could be mistaken. They looked it up, and it's a marketing solutions company. They thought it was really strange.
That would be on slide 67. Is that right?
Jill, did you have any comment on that?
I am actually in USA.gov looking up that grant right now. So I know we mentioned in this webinar that, we can all do that.
That's right.
So I am searching for that myself. I double checked the slide and it is to that organization, that LLC. If you give me a couple minutes, I can actually add some details and the link to that specific grant or contract in the Q&A.
Thank you.
We have a
So-
request to put up the final slide with the quote again when you can.
Go away.
We do have a number of panelists that we haven't heard from yet. Would each of you like to make a statement about this study, your experience doing the study, something that surprised you, or anything that you would like to say?
Posey?
Hi.
Go ahead.
Being anonymous. I think, I definitely was the probably least involved in this whole thing, but what I found, particularly when I looked up what was happening with the Department of Agriculture and, and specifically with the SNAP and WIC funds, there was a lot of emotional feelings about just how dependent we are on those funds, from the federal government. And especially when they were stopped during the shutoff, that was like hugely eye-opening. And I agree with Anne that it is important to know more about how we depend on the federal government when we choose the people to represent us. So I do agree with that.
Jill, do you have an answer for us yet?
Might take her a minute.
Not yet. I'm still looking through. In the meantime, I can actually share the website for the organization.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, where they acknowledge NSF funding on the website to kind of give you a sense of what the organization does. I'm sharing it in the Q&A.
Our attendees cannot see the Q&A.
I think Neil can post that to the, Neil, can you post that to the?
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'll share it in the chat with you, Neil, and then you can
Thank you.
share it with the participants.
Rachel, would you mind putting this slide up that shows the 2025 versus 2026 for all the agencies at the $1 trillion level? I thought this might be a nice way to leave people to just say that with the budget changes, there will be changes. Some of them are going to be bringing a lot more money into our area, and some of them are going to be reducing money for critical services that we're used to. It will change the shape of what is receiving funding and how that funding goes into our community and what services are less available or more available. I just point this out to just say, I think it's really important that we all learn what just got passed tonight and understand and look at how it can affect our lives and our community.
That brings up a really good point to our panelists. I wonder, what do you see as the next steps here? Will you continue this research in another direction, or where do you see this going?
I'd like to answer that. I'm hoping to talk to the voter service folks and see if we can't develop a way for voters to be able to evaluate congressional candidates. This has kind of opened my eyes to the whole impact of federal government in a very personal way in our county that I never knew about. So I am stunned and amazed and think that we should, because we've learned this now, we need to share it and we need to help other people be able to take a look at candidates. So that's one thing that I have in mind. I haven't told anybody yet because they're all exhausted from research. and Sue and Rachel have been building this for a long time. But oh, Jill, what do you want to explain what this is?
Oh, you're on
You're
mute.
on mute.
Sure, using that usaspending.gov site, which again, we have the link for in the presentation, so anyone is able to go ahead and do this. I was able to track down this grant to this organization, Data Elevate LLC, and it was a grant from the National Science Foundation, awarded to them in 2024, related to STEM education. And the title of this grant is Broadening Participation of Women Veterans in the STEM Workforce Through Service Learning. So the grant is about women veterans re-entering the civilian workforce, facing challenges, handling familiar and caregiver responsibilities while working to create financial stability. So that's an answer to that question, and also just kind of testament to the publicly available information through that usaspending.gov, so anybody can go in and see how federal money is being spent.
So I would like to ask Sue and Rachel, I know you guys presented the report. What is the take-home message from the two of you? Christy, too.
Sure, I'll go first. I think for me personally, it was just learning so much about how the federal government not only provides services for those in need and that how many are actually in need in our economically disadvantaged in the San Diego area is just massive. I mean, you saw it was almost like half of our students in the school system. So that was pretty eye-opening. Then on the flip side of the coin, just how much the federal government has stoked the economy from a private sector point of view. And because of all the science research that goes on in the area, because of the Department of Defense, and just it's kind of like a vital heartbeat on both sides, on the supporting those in needs, and then on also on the creating jobs and innovation in the area. It was pretty daunting was my takeaway on both sides.
I would second that. It was incredibly interesting and daunting to see how much money comes in. And again, we did not capture all of the money that the federal government gives to the state of California, to agencies in the state that they then redistribute, which is a huge amount. But without a usaspending.gov for California, we couldn't really track that money through the California budget. But just reiterating the point I made with the slide that's showing is changes are coming. Things are going to shift. Some aspects of our community are going to get more funding and some are going to get less, and we're going to need to be aware, be adaptive. It will change. I think it'll change the personality of our community because of those changes, and eager to see what was in the budget approved tonight to see how it compares to the proposed discretionary changes.
Yeah. I guess I'll just add for me personally, the scariest stats were in healthcare. When I think back at all these 12 categories, I mean, that department is a huge cut, and it's integrated with our research efforts, which also are getting cut, as we have a lot of research institutions in healthcare in the county. So that part was a little scary. I guess I'll add one more, and that was personally, I was waiting to see initiatives that seemed like non-important, and I never really saw one. I can't, I was waiting to see that, and it didn't happen. I can't speak to obviously efficiency, but nothing seemed like something you wouldn't want to spend money on personally, as I because I saw everyone's research come in.
Okay, any final words, anyone? Anne? Posey?
Thank you for everyone's work and for those who came tonight.
Then
Yes.
then I guess we can wrap up tonight's program. I want to express my deep thanks to our panelists for sharing your expertise and your perspectives. A very, very special thank you to the entire Joint Task Force. Some of them are not here on camera, but they spent many, many hours of careful research and analysis that made this presentation possible. So on behalf of the League of Women Voters of San Diego and North County, San Diego, thank you to all of our attendees tonight. The League believes that democracy works best when we are informed and engaged. Tonight, we took a step forward in our mission to empower voters and strengthen our community through dialogue, education, and advocacy. So thank you so much for joining us. A recording of this webinar will be available in a few days via our websites at lwvsandiego.org and lwvncsd.org. And that will include the PowerPoint presentation as well. If you'd like to submit questions, we will find a way of getting those answered. So don't hesitate to email me at president@lwvncsd.org, and I will forward those. And also president@lwvsandiego.org. And the full report will be coming out in a couple of weeks. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.